Okay, everyone, we're live. Thank you for joining this session. I believe we're still waiting for a few speakers, but we're going to make a start. So Kim, if you want to make a start.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, colleagues. Greetings, fellow youths across the Pacific and representatives of various youth stakeholders. Thank you, organizing committee, for this opportunity. Before I go into the content of my talk, let me acknowledge and appreciate fellow young people and existing youth climate networks and organizations across our region who are doing tremendous work at the community and national level in terms of coordinating youth-driven climate solutions and disaster risk management plans. Over the 5 years of my engagement with fellow youths, especially in climate action and disaster risk resilience, I ask youths, and this question goes to you as well, where do you see yourself and your community in the future? Many share the same sentiments based on individual experience that they want their families, their community, and country to be safe and protected from disasters, coastal erosion, landslides, and they need to be protected from these disasters and to access clean water and efficient food supply, clean air, and to live in harmony with our environment. However, the reality on the ground is opposite for most communities. Half of the region's population, approximately at 11.9 million, are under 23 in our region, which place youth at the center. And if no critical actions are taken, the youth population are at risk. We need to be proactive in our disaster risk management plans and preparedness and climate action responses. And that means to integrate international and national plans in our youth actions, not forgetting our traditional solutions. Governments and regional actors must be accountable in telling us how much have we progressed practically in implementing the global climate agreements and disaster plans and frameworks. The game has to shift from passive response to proactive planning. The good news is youths in the Pacific region are responding. They are planting trees and mangroves, others investing in green farming and agriculture, renewable energy. They are doing plastic cleanups campaigns, earthquake and tsunami drills conducted in schools, and youth-led conservation initiatives. This we do some progress. Others are in the advocacy space, calling for policy implementation. Pacific Island countries, regional and national youth stakeholders must involve young people to be part of the solutions in implementing these strategies at every level and institution. Few to mention: first, climate action policies and national disaster risk management plans must be included in education curriculums and youth awareness programs. The second, integration of youth voices in policy means that government and youth stakeholders must include young people in policy dialogues. Policymakers for climate action and disaster risk management plans must encourage bottom-up planning. Third, Pacific Island countries and youth stakeholders must create initiative and provide financial support and resource for community youth-driven solutions to address climate change and disaster preparedness. And we have to capitalize on our traditional solutions that have been handed down over generations. Pacific is one of the most natural disaster-prone regions. We are vulnerable to natural disasters that include floods, droughts, tropical cyclones, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and tsunami. It is important for children, youths, and communities to be aware of what to do in the event of disaster strike. And this can be done through awareness program and disaster drill programs. This comes back to integrating those international youth and national climate policies at our community levels, especially involving youths. And according to the words of Reverend James, the General Secretary of the Pacific Conference of Church, and I quote, "Vision the future that one day will be your future. It is you and I, as youths, who have the power to define what our tomorrow will look like." Fellow youths and delegates, only when we take ownership of our future, we will have a reason to navigate through the challenges in our journey as resilient people of the Blue Pacific. Thank you for hearing, and may God bless you all.
Hi, Ernest. Sorry, we can't seem to hear you.
Hi there. Can you?
There we go. Perfect. Sorry, carry
Wonderful.
on.
My apologies, everybody. In true Pacific Island fashion, my internet decided that it was going to play up a little bit. So, but we're here now. The problem has been resolved, and we are resilient, and we will persevere. So first of all, thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you so much, Kim, for that wonderful intervention. Before we move on to the next three speakers, maybe just a couple of things to reflect on. Just to mention that for this particular session, we've allocated 5 minutes per speaker to each of the speakers that will be providing an initial intervention. And then after that, we'll have an opportunity to share some of the questions that have been sourced through the chat box and the comment functions, which we'll then pose to the speakers that are on the call. And they'll have an opportunity to have a little bit more of an interactive session. So we've all just heard from Kim, and it's lovely to see you again, Kim. And now we'll hear from our second speaker, who is Mayren Witchep, who's joining us all the way from the Federated States of Micronesia. Over to you, Mayren.
Thank you, Ernest. As the speakers who went before me, I'd also like to pay my respects to all honorable guests, officials, panelists, and all participants of this year's Pacific Resilience meeting. My name is Mayren. I'm from an organization called Youth for Change here on the island of Pohnpei in the Federated States of Micronesia, and I'm honored to be one of your panelists today. I was asked to speak on the pillar Include, one of the 4 pillars of resiliency, more specifically the importance of youth inclusion, gender inclusion, and the inclusion of people with disabilities in climate change and disaster risk management. And I will try my best to hopefully deliver a message that reinforces the importance of a resilient Pacific. As a young member of a youth organization that engages with the youth and communities here on the island of Pohnpei, I've seen and worked with a good number of youths who have actively and passionately worked to make things different or to make a better change in their communities, and in the process have grown to be leaders and role models for their peers. That brings me to my first point, being inclusion promotes development. A personal example I can give is the youth in our youth organization. During my time as a volunteer at Youth for Change, I have seen youth members who, when given the chance to be included in raising their voices and making decisions and helping address issues in their communities, grow and acquire skills such as speaking skills, communication skills, and leadership skills, and all other related skills in helping to make a difference. Inclusion promotes development, which inevitably leads to positive and effective contributions. My second point, inclusion promotes community. Including youth, people with disabilities, and other gender groups would be promoting a community that can work together to address important issues, and a perfect example of a diverse community coming together to help address an issue is what we are doing today. We are all here today as a community to promote a resilient Pacific. I'm sure we have all heard the proverb, it takes a village to raise a child, and to use that proverb in this context, it takes a community to address a community issue. I'm here today to remind everyone of what has already been said and what should continue being said, and that is climate change is not an issue just for Micronesians, Polynesians, Melanesians, or any other minority. It's an issue for the entire world, and I believe inclusion can create the community of resilient people to address the issue of climate change and any other issue as well. My last point, inclusion promotes collective voice. Everyone has a voice, and everyone's voice counts in decision-making at any level in matters that concern you. Inclusion promotes a voice of community that is diverse and leaves no one behind despite race, social status, culture, sexual orientation, and all other contrasting factors. Our director at Youth for Change, Sylvia Elias, always leads and reminds us youth, volunteers, that actions speak louder than words. Yet here I am today, speaking rather than acting, but I will leave with the same challenge she left with in the 2019 PRM meeting, and that is to challenge all of us here today to take action as well. As the Honorable Henry Puna said in the opening session, resilience is not an aspiration, it is a necessity to let us all work together and take action to continue to build a resilient Pacific. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayren, for that wonderful intervention. I think it's really important to ensure that when we're thinking about things, that we're thinking about them with an inclusive mindset, finding ways of ensuring that every time we try and implement a new project or solve a different challenge, that we're thinking about how will this have an impact on the lives of people that don't necessarily have access to the same privileges as everybody else. I was there in 2019 when Sylvia spoke at the opening of the Pacific Resilience meeting, and I am unbelievably grateful that I'm here in 2021 to hear you speak at this open plenary, because I think the same thing that happened in 2019 is happening now with absolute chills. So thanks so much for sharing and being here today. Our third speaker comes from Tuvalu, and if my impression of Tuvalu is right, she'll be dressed up with probably one of the best faux I've ever seen in my life, and will be delivering a without address. So without further ado, I have the opportunity to welcome Miss Tulua Finikaso. Over to you, Tulua.
Hi everyone, my name is Tulua Finikaso and I'm representing from Tuvalu Red Cross. So sorry, unfortunately I'm not wearing a faux right now. So I was asked to talk about the third pillar of resilience, which is information, communication, awareness, advocacy, wisdom, and new technology. How Red Cross youth contribute to data gathering and dissemination of disaster risk and preparedness, disaster relief, and climate change mitigation. So, improve community resilience towards multi-hazard and community and climate-induced phenomena is one of Tuvalu Red Cross Society goals that rise Red Cross role in the community. So, to elaborate more on that statement, the first, it means proactive actions. Ask young youth people to take action now rather than waiting for the government to give us the okay to start planting trees in the communities. My second point is advocacy. Let's do our part disseminating relevant information to communities and how they can contribute to the welfare of the peoples and the families. For instance, every year our volunteers assist the families and the community to prepare for cyclone season. This is a requirement for them to be able to join the response team during cyclone season. My third point is to involve young people in decision making. Volunteers are in the decision making process at the community level as well as in our HQ office. Our inputs are highly considered and are respected in this level before any activity is implemented. For example, our plastic campaign, from experience, we were educated by the Department of Waste Fisheries Department on the importance of single-use plastic impacts on our communities so we can make good decisions for our lives and the future of Tuvalu. Fourth point is take action after making informed decision. After discussions with some youth representatives and stakeholders, we were able to agree to a decision that today is the time to take action. So yes, we have made use of the available fundings to assist Funafuti Islands in collecting waste in conservation islands and the mangrove planting. So my final point is to join other existing organizations, ministries who are conducting national surveys in small ways. They are contributing to the bigger picture of the project, making a difference from advocating to actually doing the work. For example, by taking part in survey, you will get first-hand view of the issues in Tuvalu. So to quote Mr. Ebeli, our Pacific Youth Network President, quoted in the last Pacific Resilience meeting, by working with the existing social structures, this allows the community to take a greater level of ownership of the solution and action plan by plan they devise. This is a sustainable and long-term solution towards building resilience in Pacific communities. So disaster resilience become a generational effort. We support communities to build back better, to be stronger and better prepared for the next disaster. Thank you. That's all from the Tuvalu.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Tulua. And I should mention, you started by saying that you are sorry to disappoint, but let me tell you, there was absolutely no disappointment. I think it's there's something wonderful to see a young Pacific Islander that can deliver something as clear and as crisp as that, looking at what are the solutions we're coming to, how are we working together to ensure that we can achieve some of the aspirations that are outlined in the framework for a resilient development in the Pacific. And so just I'm absolutely honored, and I definitely have the better end of the stick over here, getting to listen to Mayren, Kim, and Tulua sharing their experiences from the front lines and being able to really harness what it really means to be a resilient Pacific Islander who's driving change, not only in their communities, but ensuring that others after them and those within their communities are able to do the same thing. And so it's incredibly special for me to be able to witness all of this. Earlier, I shared that the working group on Pacific Island youth and the Pacific Resilience Youth Working Group is made up of youth and friends of youth, and I have the absolute pleasure to be able to introduce a significant friend of youth in the Pacific, somebody who's been working tirelessly to ensure that we have the opportunities to really realize all the potential that we have access to. Somebody who supports individuals from just basic one-on-one questions to being able to ensure that we're prepared for some of the global things that we're participating in. And so I'm humbled and honored and privileged to be able to now pass on to the one and only Miss Costa. Over to you, Vivian.
Thank you so much, Ernest. I feel, gosh, that's a lovely introduction. Bula vinaka, everyone, and it's lovely to be able to meet with you. First up, I'd just like to thank the panelists this afternoon for sharing with us. I think that we've learned a great deal from you, and I look forward to the discussions that will follow in the breakout rooms. So I've been tasked to provide just a quick update on what youth and what we are doing in the Pacific Resilience Partnership. So I wanted to go back and start with the PRM. Excuse me, there we go. And as Sebu had indicated earlier, the PRM 2019 theme was Youth Futures in a Resilient Pacific. And I think it's really important for us to recognize and for us to acknowledge that the involvement of youth in the PRM process was in fact negotiated. So this was a negotiated process. The initial plan was to have an information sharing from various organizations. However, civil society organizations negotiated to have a youth forum instead, where young people could share their experiences and learn from each other. And this really had to do with recognizing that young people are the arms and legs of the humanitarian response. And also that we have a lot of knowledge in resilience building, and that we critically think about resilience, particularly in relation to areas such as climate change, oceans, biodiversity, and human mobility. Therefore, youth should have the opportunity to share that knowledge and practice. And as a result, that one-day forum was convened. So an outcome statement was produced from that forum. And it is interesting that when we look back at that outcome statement, we see the linkage to our responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. The key elements of the outcome statement are, firstly, the recognition of traditional knowledge and practice as a tool for resilience building. For example, the use of storytelling to build awareness, and the call for the reintroduction of sustainable and resilient practices such as traditional seed transport or traditional farming practices. Secondly, there was recognition of localization as a tool of resilience building, just recognizing that one size does not fit all, that locally led initiatives that are realistic to the community's situation provide timely and sustainable responses to disasters. Thirdly, that women, people with disabilities, and persons of diverse gender identity are disproportionately impacted during and after disasters. For example, there are safety issues such as increased levels of violence, including sexual violence. And there is limited access to resources such as sanitary products. Fourthly, that mental health is important to resilience, and therefore mental health training should be required in preparedness and recovery work. Fifthly, we call for a redefining of resilience from a Pacific context, that when we talk about resilience, that we need to take note of the knowledge that we do have and the ways in which we have been doing this for many generations. Sixthly, that encouraging clean energy investment is a key component. And so our young people talked about promoting financial instruments with banks, where, for example, having a 5% of your portfolio, lending portfolio geared towards clean energy investment. But I think really the key outcome or the key statement in that outcome statement is what Sevu has referred to already as youth engagement. And he gave us a number of examples in which that has happened following on from the forum. And I'd just like to add that the UN Secretary General acknowledged here in Fiji the nuclear legacies of the Pacific Islands and the need for cleanup by those responsible. And this is outlined in point 4 of the outcome statement. Also acknowledged that forum leaders recognized the work of youth advocates in 2019 at the South Taulanga and at the Pacific Island Forum Leaders meeting. But it doesn't end there. One of the key calls in 2019 was the establishment of a Pacific Resilience Youth Hub. This has the support of civil society representatives on the PRP task force, the Pacific Resilience Partnership Task Force. And to this end, a virtual youth think tank was held in July 2020, where it was decided that the hub would, one, be a focal point for youth working with the FRDP, that it would also be a resource center for young people and for youth groups and organizations to access technical expertise, but also to share knowledge between themselves. And thirdly, that it would be a mentoring and coaching, that it would provide mentoring and coaching for youth advocates, particularly those just starting out in the various areas. This hub is still in process. It still has the continued support of the CSO reps on the task force, and the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat has also set aside a little funding to help set up the hub. And so we're hoping that that we can actually move this along further and get this off the ground. Now that's just a short update on the outcome statement itself and some of the key issues that we were talking about in 2019 and how apt that we did that because in 2020 we were hit by this global pandemic and where we can recognize that what we said about disasters and crises does expand to health crises that we have, the health crisis that we have now. I'm going to leave it there and thank you, Ernest. And I look forward to further discussions on this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Vivian, for that. And I think maybe just one really key thing to mention here is that the youth statement that Vivian was talking about earlier was actually something that was put together by Pacific Island youth from across the region in a day. And so it really is recognizing some significantly hard work that was put together by young people from across the region, sharing ideas and experiences, and really highlighting what are some of the key things that we need to call for action on. And it's great to see that there's been a significant recognition of youth inputs and youth voices at the forum leaders level, at global levels. I think now, just to quote Mayren, it's time stop talking about, yes, we acknowledge the contribution, but also this is how we're going to move forward, ensure that the ideas and the rhetoric now turns to some level of action. So I think that's a wonderful way to round off this segment. But I think if there are no questions in the chat box to be shared, then we can potentially move on to the next section, which will be the breakout session. But I'm gonna wait about a minute to see if there are any questions that have appeared that we can ask to some of our participants today. Perhaps maybe just before we launch into some other questions that we have, I'd like to ask and see if Kim or Mayren or Tulua or Vivian has any last statement that they would like to share. It could be something related to what you've shared earlier, or if there's an activity that you would like to call some young people to be a part of, or if there's something later in the program for the week of the Pacific Resilience meeting that you would like to plug and ensure that young people can find ways of infiltrating that space. Now's your time to share that. We have about 15 minutes left for this session.
Thank you so much, Ernest. I might just start off. As Ernest sort of indicated, I've been in this youth space for quite a while. As a result, I've seen many advocates come through the system, so to speak. And that there are times when it's difficult and it's hard to progress your issue. And so I just want to take that opportunity to just encourage you that there are going to be hard times like with anything else, but perseverance is key, particularly when we're talking about such incredible issues like climate change, like biodiversity loss, like disaster preparedness and disaster risk, and disaster mitigation. That yes, these are difficult issues, but if we don't speak about it, then who will? And so I'd just like to encourage all of our young people across the region, those here on this platform, but also beyond that, to just keep up the fight. There are times when it will be difficult, but that's where the community is important. And so for some of us, we're meeting for the first time, and now we have a network. And so reach out to your network, just if nothing else, just to say hello and to be encouraging. Thank you, Ernest.
Thanks, Vivian. I think you've touched on a really important point. Sometimes it's going to be hard, and sometimes it's going to suck, and sometimes you don't want to work too hard, but that's okay, because we have an enormous community of young people and young people supporters that are here to kind of hold us up when things get a little bit too tough. So we have some questions that have come through, and I think I'll direct this first question over to you, Mayren, because you were speaking about inclusion. And so the first question is, recognizing that inclusion is integral towards achieving many of the development goals that we have, as well as social justice issues more broadly, how do we ensure that government policies and programs are actually inclusive and not just based on tokenism? It's a big question, but maybe if you can spend about a minute or two reflecting on how we can avoid tokenism and really drive home general widespread inclusion. Over to you, Mayren.
Thank you, Ernest. I will try my best to answer this question. In my opinion, to ensure that government policies and programs are actually inclusive, and not just based on tokenism. I think the best way to approach this is to actually have inclusion from all people. I know I'm a little bit everywhere explaining this, but as best as I can say, the possible way for this to take place is to actually have those issues available or known to everyone. Because, for example, here on the island of Pohnpei, some people ignore or they tend to look away from issues because they do not want to recognize that those issues exist. And the way I see it, for people to actually be included, they need to be aware of those issues. So from awareness, the next step can be taken for not just the government, but for everyone to actually be included in those issues. I'm sorry if I did not answer the question as directly as I could.
No, I think you're perfectly clear, Mayran. I think it's really important to recognize that for change to take place, and kind of leveraging off of Vivian's point about it being difficult, there needs to be genuine interest from all parties involved to ensure that change can take place. Change is difficult, change is hard. And especially when you're changing institutions that have been reinforced for decades. So I think that first step of ensuring that there is genuine interest and ensuring that inclusion is actually mainstreamed into some of this work is a fantastic point. We also have another question that's come through. And this question has come through from the Solomon Islands Hub. So shout out to my Solomon Island brothers and sisters that are over in the Solomon Islands Hub. And their question is, what are some policy influences where young people use those outcome statements in PNG, in FSM, in Tuvalu, and in Kiribati? So I gather that this question is really targeted at everybody on the call. But maybe we'll take a stab at the question from the point of view of PNG. So the question, Kim, here is, how have the outcome statements been rolled out in PNG? Some of the things that Vivian was talking about, how have we seen them being actualized in PNG? So over to you, Kim.
Thank you, Ernest, and thank you, my Melanesian brothers and also Pacific, for this great question. And I think that question comes to all of us. How are we implementing these strategies, especially now that we are in a resilient forum, youth forum, and are following this? How will you implement in your communities? Now, as I've mentioned in my statement, it's a challenge to localize this in your communities, and that's where bottom-up planning and why we need to integrate. And on practical terms, while the government here in PNG is implementing those regional and international policies, especially through the national disaster, national determined contribution plans, there's some actions, especially in tree planting initiatives that the government has launched, and it also has Beat Plastic campaign, where now the government puts a ban on plastic, so there's no shopping plastics in shops, so you have to get your own bag, and that also promotes local matters into creating balloons for people to take to the shops. Now, these policies are at the government level, and it's always a challenge to take or streamline these policies into communities, because the challenges are inevitable and it's diverse or complex in different regions. Geography is a challenge, digital reach is a challenge, and of course our culture is a challenge with complexities in there. What I can say for young people is we have our elders in the communities, and this is one thing that I've seen over time in my engagement with young people. You see the challenge that is happening in your village, and your elders are well aware of that. Our elders are well aware of that, and we hear this through oral history told to us by our parents, by the community, that this particular event happened over time. And that's one thing as young people or as for young people taking action. We need to identify the problem and what needs to be done, and where we can, or who to reach in order to help us do these activities, because you can't do it alone. You can't do it alone. And I think that's where I'm finding my space. While I think we attend these regional forums, international forums, this needs to be implemented at the community level. And for government to localize or mainstream that into policy, it's a challenge. But as you are aware, I think within this space, we are all aware of these processes. And it's a challenge for us to implement this with the knowledge that we gain from here and share among other fellow youth networks and at the community level to take practical actions. We are doing that. We are doing sustainable water projects, water dam projects. We are doing tree planting at the community level. So practically we are doing that as young people. Let the policymakers, we do talk where young people shoot ourselves into, and at the same time we take actions. Not only talk, but to take actions practical. I know it's not the exact answer that you're looking for, but I hope this clarifies some. Thanks. Over.
Thanks for that, Kim. And we have about 4 minutes left on this, so I'm gonna quickly give the opportunity over to you, Tulua, to see if there's any practical action that you'd like to share from Tuvalu. I know you shared some earlier work in Funafuti, but if there's any other work that you'd like to share, the floor is yours, but please bear in mind for only the next couple of minutes. Over to you, Tulua. There is a chance that we might be experiencing some technical difficulties. That's okay. It's expected. We're all doing things a little bit differently, working from home, conducting conferences online. That's perfectly fine. Once again, I'd like to extend a big vinakavaka level from here from Fiji to our colleagues Kim, Vivian, Tulua, and Mayren, who've really taken time to fill this session with a significant amount of information and challenges, but also a large amount of hope. And then I think it's been a fantastic session. Before we round off, I would like to give a shout out to some of our national hubs that have been tuning in from their home countries. There are 9 different national hubs that are tuning in from different places in their own home countries. So shout out to Micronesia, to the team in Kiribati, to our gang in Nauru, to the team in Palau, who's based out of the Palau Resident Coordinator's Office, I believe. Those that are at the USP campus in Marshall Islands. I tell you what, I would love to be in the USP campus in the Marshall Islands. It's a stunning campus. Those that are here in Samoa, over in the Solomons, in Tuvalu, and also those that are at the Yumi work in Vanuatu. So massive shout out to our country hubs that are tuning in and taking time at whatever time of the day it is there to be part of this process. So we have a couple of minutes before we move into the next session, which is the breakout rooms in the Pacific Talanoa. As most of you know, there are 4 different breakout sessions that will be taking place in the Pacific Talanoa. There are 4 pillars, and each of these will be facilitated by a different facilitator. So if you are in part of the pillar 1, which looks specifically at integration, and how we can integrate DRR and climate change, as well as resilient infrastructure and risk finance in a really clear mainstream way, then you'll be facilitated by Rusiate. Rusiate has arguably one of the longest surnames I've ever seen, so I might not attempt to pronounce it in case I make a massive mistake. But so if you're pillar 1, please join Rusiate. If you're in pillar 2, which is specifically around inclusion, then you'll be facilitated by Chofi. And pillar 3, which is around information, communication, and awareness, that'll be with Salote. And then if you're in pillar 4, looking specifically on sustainability and local and nature-based solutions, then you have the pleasure of being with Sharon as your facilitator. Just before we break out into these rooms, I'd like to invite Katie, who will be able to share with you kind of the more technical side of how to join some of these breakout rooms. I'm a young person, but I think I'm an embarrassment to youth all over the place because I have no idea how to use technology successfully. So hence we've called somebody who will be able to help you a little bit better. Over to you, Katie.
Thank you, Ernest. It's quite simple. So if you just like to leave this session, you will see a tab at the top of the screen with breakout rooms, and then you can just join those rooms just as you did this session. I can see we have a lot of unanswered questions. It's really nice to see that you guys are asking lots of questions. I'm sorry we couldn't fit it all in, but if you would like to reach out to our speakers on the platform, you can send them a message and have the discussion there, or you can meet them in the lounge and have like a face-to-face meeting there and get your questions answered. So thank you to all of our speakers. I'm going to end the session now. So everyone, please move over to the breakout rooms.